Greetings, people of Earth and whatever other planets you might be from. 'Tis I, 480 Bolts. Today we are going to be talking about the fourth game in the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy IV. This was also the first game to be released on the Super Nintendo, and kind of sort of the definitive game of the series. Like, the rest of the games that followed sort of built on this game's template, if you will. So let's get started. After completing Final Fantasy III in 1990, Square planned to develop two Final Fantasy games, one for the Nintendo Entertainment System and the other for the forthcoming Super Nintendo, to be known as Final Fantasy IV and V, respectively. Due to financial and scheduling constraints, Square dropped plans for the NES game and continued development for the SNES version, retitled Final Fantasy IV. A mock-up screenshot of the cancelled title was produced for a Japanese magazine, but little other information exists about it. Series creator and director Hironobu Sakaguchi has stated that the NES version was approximately 80% complete and certain ideas were reused for the SNES version. The game was released for the Super Famicom in July of 1991 in Japan. Square intended to release the game in North America, however, you may recall that FF2 and 3 were at the time exclusive titles in Japan, and all the Americans had was their first FF title. Square didn't want to cause too much confusion by giving us Final Fantasy 1 and 4 but not 2 and 3, so they released the game for the Super Nintendo in November of 1991 under the title of Final Fantasy II for North America, and as for Europe, well, they would just have to wait a while before they got to play the game at all. It's worthy to note that the version we got on the SNES was in fact an easy-type mod of the original game. It's also worth noting that the translation was pretty crappy, mostly on account of the translation team trying to keep things as kid-friendly as possible in an otherwise somewhat mature storyline. This resulted in words like death or dead being replaced with fallen or down, and let's not forget everyone's favorite translational error, you spoony bard! Since then, there have been many remakes and ports of the game for different platforms. A PlayStation port debuted in Japan on March 21st of 1997. This version is identical to the original game, although minor tweaks introduced in the Easy type are present. The most notable changes in the PlayStation release are the inclusion of a full motion video opening and ending sequence, the ability to move quickly in dungeons and towns by holding the cancel button, and the option of performing a memo save anywhere on the world map. This version was released in America in 2001 as part of a compilation package entitled Final Fantasy Chronicles, which also included a port of Chrono Trigger, and in Europe in 2002 as part of a compilation package called Final Fantasy Anthology, which included a port of Final Fantasy V. Due to its incredibly simplistic and forced dialogue, as well as the rather long loading times and the really bad sound quality, I would consider the Chronicles version just barely worth your time, if at all. Another port was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2005 in Japan and North America, and in 2006 in Europe. A full 3D remake was released for the Nintendo DS in 2007 in Japan and 2008 in North America and Europe. This version included more polished dialogue, remade music and voice acting, as well as major tweaks to the gameplay, and a 2D remake was released for the PlayStation Portable in 2011 for all three regions as part of a compilation entitled Final Fantasy IV: The Complete Collection, which also featured a direct sequel called Final Fantasy IV: The After Years, and an episode set in between the two called Final Fantasy IV: Interlude. For this review, I will be showing footage of a fan translation SNES ROM hack of the original Japanese Super Famicom version. I don't know how accurate this translation is, but it definitely is more fleshed out than most of the other versions I've played. However, the humor tends to be more vulgar and crude than I care for. The story this time around is much more complex than the previous titles. As before, the game's setting and characters are completely disconnected from any of the other titles. However, certain elements from previous titles are reused, such as the Four Fiends, the Elemental Crystals, Cid, and Chocobos. The game follows Cecil, a young knight from the Kingdom of Baron, and the various people he comes into contact with on his quest to stop a man named Golbez, who believes that collecting the Elemental Crystals of the world will unlock the ultimate power and make him a deity. Cecil's adventure takes him through the surface of the world, to the underworld where an entire civilization of dwarves lies underground, and ultimately to the moon where a race of powerful beings called Lunarians live. It is here that Cecil learns that Golbez is merely a puppet of an even greater evil. The Lunarians' home planet was destroyed eons ago, and they moved to the Earth to live, not knowing that it was inhabited. Realizing that they were far too advanced to cohabitate with humans, the Lunarians created a second moon to sleep on until the humans were evolved enough. A Lunarian named Zamus refused to sleep and used his psychic powers to control the mind of Golbez in an attempt to exterminate the human race entirely. In the end, the guardian of the Lunarians, Fuso Ya, defeats Zamus with the help of Golbez, but Zamus is reborn as Zeromus, an entity composed entirely out of Zamus's hatred and malice with the desire to obliterate all existence. Cecil, who is revealed to be half human and half Lunarian, and the brother of Golbez, stands with his friends before Zeromus and destroys him. As he dies, Zeromus vows that as long as evil exists in the hearts of man, he he will never be completely destroyed. The story is quite immersive and deals with many different ideas like friendship, love, loyalty, courage, redemption, forgiveness, self-sacrifice, and even death, and features a variety of different characters. Cecil is the main character and will be in your party at all times, but many other characters will come and go throughout the course of the game. Cecil is an example of a character with amazing potential that is never followed through. At the beginning of the game, he is a Dark Knight and the leader of the Red Wings, the elite military force of the world's leading power, the Kingdom of Baron. Orphaned long ago, he was raised as King Baron's son, along with another orphan, Cain Highwind, the leader of the Dragoons. The game opens with Cecil and his men returning from a raid on the village of Mysidia, home of the Mages, where at the king's command the Red Wings stole Mysidia's crystal of water and ruthlessly cut down anyone who stood in their way. At first, Cecil tells himself and his men that the king must have had his reasons. However, he begins to question his loyalty to the king, who then relieves him of his command of the Red Wings and sends him to the village of Mist to deliver a magic ring. The ring causes Mist to burn. Realizing that the king intends to kill the inhabitants of Mist, the Summoners, Cecil renounces all loyalty to the Kingdom of Baron and sets out to collect the crystals before Baron. During this time, Cecil questions himself. Is defying the king the right thing to do, or should he have remained loyal to the man who raised him as his own son even though he believes his actions to be wrong? And will his hands forever be stained with the blood of the Mysidians he slaughtered? Eventually, his journey brings him back to Mysidia, where, having no one else to turn to, he is forced to ask for help from the very people he butchered. That takes guts. He is then sent to Mount Ordeals, where he is given a chance to redeem himself and becomes a paladin, a knight of light. At this point, all character development for Cecil just sort of stops. He remains the most pivotal character in the game, but doesn't really have any personality. I think it would have been interesting if Golbez had tried to convince him that he isn't a true paladin and will always be the Dark Knight who killed the Mysidians, leading Cecil to doubt himself even more. Sadly, the game doesn't do this. Cain is an okay character. He is both rival and brother to Cecil and hopes to become a great dragoon like his father before him. Twice in the game, he is controlled by Golbez and betrays the team. At the end of the game, he goes to Mount Ordeals and hopes to redeem himself for his actions. I like the idea that he could betray Cecil, but the way it's executed isn't all that great to me. It all boils down to him being hypnotized by Golbez and not really responsible for his actions. I think it would have been interesting if he had betrayed Cecil of his own free will, only being deceived by Golbez's lies. Now, I realize that's asking a lot, considering he's been Cecil's adoptive brother since they were children, but I think it could have been done. Cain could resent Cecil for betraying the king, or he could feel jealousy toward him and Rosa. It could have been possible. Rosa, Cecil's betrothed, is a young white mage. Her big thing is that she wants to support Cecil in the face of his enemies. She's there to heal him when he's hurt, protect him when he's in a tight spot, and so on. Aside from getting kidnapped by Golbez and having to be rescued by Cecil, she does this quite well. She refuses to leave his side even when everyone else, Cecil included, tells her to. Palom and Porum, black and white mages respectively from Mysidia, are great comic relief. Porum is the kind, well-mannered one who spends most of her time rebuking her brother Palom, who spends most of his time goofing around and showing off. Enough said. Edge, the ninja prince of Iblan, is another comical character who spends most of his time trying to look up Rydia's skirt. Enough said. Sid, the airship engineer from Baron, is another comical character. This is the third Sid of the franchise and the first one to be a playable character as well as having an actual personality. He's energetic and spirited despite his old age, brash and spunky but unwaveringly loyal. Tella is the only character in the lineup to actually really and truly die. He really doesn't have anything going for him other than his quest to avenge his daughter Anna, on whose death he blames Golbez. He doesn't have much in the way of personality, he sucks in battle. It's kind of like the game makes sure not to let you get too attached to him so his death doesn't hurt you that much. The saddest part about his death is that it's completely in vain and doesn't accomplish anything, but then that's typically how revenge works in real life. Learn that lesson and learn it quickly. Edward, the Prince of Damcian, is probably everyone's least favorite character, but I actually really like him. Don't get me wrong, he sucks in battle worse than Tella, but his character development is very real. The husband of Tella's daughter Anna, he blames himself for her death and feels powerless to do anything about it, but eventually finds the courage to save others from evil. When you break it all down, Edward is a guy who feels worthless and weak, but discovers that he can make a difference, and honestly, how many of us can relate to that? I know I can. I actually think the worst character of all is Yang, the leader of the Fable Monks. Don't get me wrong, Yang is a freaking machine in battle, but story-wise, he really has no personality. He's basically just muscle. Probably most people's favorite character is Rydia, the Summoner of Mist. When we first meet her, she is a little girl whose mother has been inadvertently killed by Cecil's actions, and she has to be brave and strong and trust Cecil to protect her. She is eventually swallowed by the king of the Phantom Beast, Leviathan, who takes her to the Phantom World to train her in the arts of summoning and black magic. When she returns to the main world, she is a beautiful and spunky young lady who remains by Cecil's side to assist him in saving the world, despite the fact that he is responsible for the death of her mother. I love the whole mystical lady of the underworld, friend of beasts thing she's got going on. Fuso Ya is only in your party for a short time and is barely even worth mentioning.
The four fiends aren't anything too special. Cognazzo is responsible for killing King Baron before the start of the game and has been masquerading as him this whole time, thus explaining why the good king would suddenly turn evil, but apart from that, they're basically just mindless puppets. The only interesting one is Rubicon, whom I actually really like. This guy actually has a sense of honor. He believes in fair fighting, so much so that he will restore your entire party's HP and MP when you face him because he wants you to bring your best. When you beat him, he accepts defeat and recognizes that there is strength in numbers. Now let's talk about Golbez. This guy is freaking scary. He's powerful, he's ruthless, and he always seems to be just one step ahead of you. Anytime you think you can relax and take a deep breath, he shows up to keep you on your toes. I will admit that him being Cecil's brother does feel like an overused plot device, but it works here, I guess. After Zamus's hypnotic spell is broken, he doesn't forget his terrible actions. He considers himself unworthy to return to Earth, and even unworthy to be called Cecil's brother, and remains on the moon to sleep with the rest of the Lunarians. But we must remember that Cecil's hands were stained with blood at one point, and he found redemption, so we can at least hope the same for Golbez. Now let's talk about Zamus. I think he's an okay villain. His motives for wanting to exterminate the human population is quite simple, really. He just wants to kill the humans so that his people will have a nice new planet to live in. And he controls Golbez quite effectively. My main problem is that there is no indication of him until almost the end of the game. By the time we learn about him, I've gotten used to the idea that Golbez is the bad dude. I've watched him bomb Castle Damcian, manipulate Kain, kidnap Rosa, kill Tella, and I've already formed a righteous anger towards him. He deserves the punishment I have fitted out for him. But I never get to deliver said punishment. Now I have to take all that anger and focus it on this dude who, until a few seconds ago, I didn't even know existed. But maybe that is yet another lesson the game was trying to teach us. Always know who your true enemies are. Overall, the concept of this game's story and plot is good, but the execution just feels a bit sloppy and forced at times, in my opinion. One thing I really like though is the ending. It doesn't just stop after the final boss. You get this really nice epilogue that shows you which each character is up to after the adventure. You see Edward working to rebuild Damcian, Yang and Edge becoming kings of their respective homelands, Rydia teaching the Phantom Children about humans, and Cecil and Rosa being coronated as the new king and queen of Baron. Now let's talk about the gameplay. Final Fantasy IV has one of the most straightforward and simplistic battle growth systems of any RPG I've ever played. First off, job classes. Like FF1 and 3, this game has a variety of job classes, but this time you don't get to choose any of them. The different job classes are determined by whichever characters happen to be with you at any part in the story. Basically, each character is made for one thing. Kain is a dragoon, Rosa is a white mage, Yang is a monk, Edward is a bard, Edge is a ninja, and so on and so forth. The only characters who show any sort of variety are Cecil, who transforms from Dark Knight to Paladin, thus changing his battle skin entirely, and Rydia, whose official job class is Summoner, but she also specializes as Black Mage. Each character has their own set of tricks they can perform in battle. Kain can jump, Yang can kick all enemies at once as well as meditate to increase his attack power, Edge can steal from enemies, throw knives, swords, and shurikens at enemies, and perform magic-based elemental attacks. As a Dark Knight, Cecil can use an attack that hits all enemies at the expense of his own HP, and as a Paladin, he will block any physical attacks directed at party members who are in critical HP with his own body, as well as have access to some limited white magic. You no longer have to buy white and black magic spells this time around. Your mage characters will learn their different spells when they reach certain levels. The only spells you have to actually acquire this time are summoning spells, the small ones that can possibly be dropped from battles, and the big ones which have to be given to you by certain phantom beasts, and in most cases after you defeated said phantom beasts in battle. In short, the only way to grow in this game is to level up. That's all you need to worry about. The biggest newest thing about this game is the ATB, Active Time Battle system. Instead of being completely turn-based, the characters and enemies have to take some time to prepare themselves physically and mentally, and their turns won't come up right away, and once they've used a turn, they have to take some time to sort of recharge. The amount of time it takes depends on the speed stats of each character, and spells like Haste and Slow can help you speed characters up or slow enemies down. The row system works for the most part like it did in FF3, the only difference is that the individual character slots alternate rows. The maximum amount of characters you'll have in a single party in this game is 5, and each slot determines the row. So character slots 1, 3, and 5 are in the front row, while slots 2 and 4 are in the back row. Then if you enter the change command either in the menu or on the battle screen, the slots alternate, causing the 1, 3, and 5 slots to now be back rowed, and the 2 and 4 slots to be front rowed. If you ever want to change just one character's row, you'll need to move that character to a different slot. I actually kind of like this system. It works well, and it's also really nice that when you get caught in a back attack, all you need to do is hit the change command once and your rows will be fixed. There's no longer a run command in the battle menu. If you want to run from battles now, hold down the R and L buttons, but honestly, who runs from battle? A lot of RPGs, particularly FF titles, are saturated with lots of different things to manage. Job classes, materia, magicite, junctioning, sphere grids, etc. This game doesn't bother with any of that. It focuses on one thing, your levels. If your levels are high, your chances of victory are strong. If your levels are low, not so much. Honestly, the most complicated thing to worry about is managing your weapons and armor. You don't always want to throw away your old equipment when you get new stuff, especially if you have elemental-based weapons. Different enemies can be weak to different types of weapons, so you may find yourself switching weapons mid-battle. All that being said, this game is no cakewalk. I would by no means call it stupid hard, but it can be very tough at times. A lot of it is manageable by having good strategies, especially with boss fights. There are very few boss fights in which victory is attainable simply by wailing away at enemies. Typically, you'll have to exploit some sort of weakness or wait for the boss to change into some certain form or something. One thing that comes in real handy are status ailments. Cast the miniature spell on an army of giants, turning them into little midgets, or turn an army of vicious magic-casting warlocks into pigs or toads, and your job just became a whole lot easier. One thing that can affect the difficulty level is the party members you are given. Since you don't get to choose your character's job classes, you pretty much just have to make do with what you're handed with. I honestly think the Tower of Zot is one of the hardest segments in the main game, if only for the party members you're given, specifically Tella. This guy's MP is at a constant of 90 from the moment you meet him to the moment he dies. His magic power sucks, his HP and defense are frightfully low, and he just happens to be your only healer at this point. Once you get Rosa back in the party, things really start looking up, at least until Yang leaves in the Tower of Babel, dang near crippling your party's offensive power. Beyond that, most of the game's difficulty is reduced by you spending time to level grind. There are a few side quests to take on that net you some okay items, mostly different summons for Rydia. The final area is pretty tough, all things considered. It's quite a large maze filled with some enemies that hit pretty hard and some very powerful weapons that are guarded by very powerful enemies. The final boss is easy enough if you know what to do, but should not be underestimated. Something new introduced in this game are save points, which appear at various points of dungeons. Standing on one of them not only allows you to save your game, but also allows you to use a tent or cottage as if you were on the world map. Every character you recruit is pre-named, however in most villages you can meet a strange creature called the Naming Way who can change the name of any character in your current party to anything you'd like. Limited inventory space is still a problem in this game. Fortunately, the fat chocobo returns and works just like he did in the previous game. Also, thankfully, this is the last game to feature this archaic problem. Along with him and the standard yellow chocobos, we've also got two new chocobos added to the game. The white chocobo found in every chocobo forest restores everyone's MP when you catch him, so if your party's HP is kind of low, just have your healer cast Cure enough times to restore everybody's HP, then catch the white chocobo to restore your MP, and voila! You didn't even have to rest up or use a tent. The black chocobos are only found in some very specific forests. These guys can fly, not as high as airships, so you won't be able to cross mountains on them, but they can only land in wooded areas. One thing you really need to keep your eye out for is secret passageways. There are many points in dungeons where certain walls are fake and you can pass right through them, providing you with shortcuts or leading to separate rooms altogether. This was a thing in some of the previous FF titles, but quite a bit more so here. The North American SNES version highlighted some of these passages for you so you could clearly see them, but in other versions you just kinda have to know that they're there. If you look closely enough, you might be able to see a small indication of a secret passage. The graphics are okay. The same types of sprites and backgrounds from the NES titles are reused here, however the textures are more detailed and polished this time around. I'm unsure of why the black chocobos are actually purple, but okay. I will say that I adore Golbez's battle portrait when you fight him, and the backgrounds for both the Lunar Core and the final boss look really cool. The music is once again composed by Nobuo Uematsu. Compositionally, it's quite good. Some tracks are kind of boring, like Damsian, the dungeons, and the standard town music, while other tracks like Barren Castle, Mysidia, and the Dwarven Kingdom are quite catchy. Some tracks like Toroya, the Moon, and the Red Wings are quite beautiful and haunting. The main theme from the first FF title returns as part of a prologue at the beginning, and is also used in the ending of the game, as will be a recurring custom throughout the series. Something new this time around, most of the characters have their own theme that represents them. Not everyone, though. Yang, Edge, Tella, Fusoya, and even Cecil don't have their own unique themes. Rosa's theme is definitely meant to capture the love between her and Cecil, and I think it does that quite well. Kane's theme is somewhat dark and somber, and even a bit on the emotional side, and really does a good job representing him. Rydia's theme is sweet and innocent, with just a touch of sadness to it considering the losses she has suffered. Edward's theme is a tune that he often plays on his harp, the tune that ultimately allows Cecil and his friends to have a fighting chance against the Dark Elf. Cecil's theme is so upbeat and happy and unforgivingly catchy. Palom and Porum's theme is standard slapstick comedy, as one would expect. Probably my favorite theme in the entire game is that of Golbez. This tune is so deliciously evil and wicked and always increases the tension levels by a good bit. The game has its own main theme, of which there are several different versions. The main arrangement is heard on the overworld map, and the mountains, game over, and underworld map are all different arrangements of this one theme. Even the boss and final boss themes contain elements from this theme. There are 4 different battle themes for this game, one for the standard battles, a boss theme, a big bad boss theme, and the final boss theme, all of which are quite good, particularly the big bad and final boss themes. There are also 2 versions of the Chocobo theme. The main arrangement is heard when you're riding the yellow Chocobos, while a sort of samba version is heard when you're riding the black Chocobos. This started the infamous and wonderful trend of the many different versions of the Chocobo theme that would be heard throughout the franchise. Production-wise, it sounds good. Yes, SNES music does sound like old cheap synthesizers, but there are enough layers of sound here to really make everything sound more full. This is the type of music you could easily hear a live orchestra performing, and you could just as easily hear a rock band performing. My only complaint about the production is the overall pitch is about a quarter of a key higher than it should be. What you would think would be in the key of C is actually somewhere halfway around between C and C sharp. If you're not a musician like me, then you probably have no clue of what I'm talking about. And if you are a musician, you probably still never even noticed this unless you have perfect pitch like me. But now you're all aware of it. You're welcome. So my overall opinion of this game leaves me somewhat conflicted. On a personal level, Final Fantasy VI has been and will always be my absolute favorite in the franchise, and I don't think this game even makes number 3. But from a purely objective standpoint, I have to admit that this game is probably the better RPG. The gameplay is challenging enough to keep things interesting, the battle mechanics are rock solid, and the game keeps things very simple and straightforward but still demands enough from the player to keep it fun. I suppose FF6 just has more elements that I personally like, and I will definitely say that this game's story, although a huge improvement from the first 3 titles, is probably its weakest point. I do think that this game is somewhat underrated, and it's definitely worth your time, and I suppose if I had to give it a position on the list, my 4th favorite FF title.
Well, that was Final Fantasy IV, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the video, hope you enjoyed the review. I definitely enjoyed the game. So please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the usual stuff, and I will see you next time. Pieces.